but in brief, Gary Hall Jr. is a three-time Olympian. I think after his first Olympic tour, he was diagnosed with diabetes, and he's going to tell about his journey. And one of the things I like about Gary Hall Jr. is that he equates the journey to the goal as just as important as the podium stand itself. And also everything that's happened along the way with his battle and how he's able to transcend the sport into something valuable for healthcare and fitness and diabetes advocacy. So Gary, maybe you can share with us your thoughts on the journey itself and what was memorable about it with the odds that you overcame.
Well, you know, I'm not the only person that has suggested that it's the journey, not the destination. And that has certainly been the case, that, you know, the lessons learned along the way are really of greatest value. You know, a chunk of metal is fantastic. It's symbolic it's a reward for the amount of work that you put in along the way, and recognition of achievement. But the real value it comes in the character that is built. This is the point of sport. We test ourselves, we test our limits, we challenge ourselves, and you know, it teaches us to face adversity, deal with adversity, and overcome, persevere. And it's really that it's that persevering perseverance that is the journey ultimately.
Can you give like a couple memorable examples of either day-to-day training or through the process itself, or even dealing with the media or dealing with your coaches or your family, sort of the adversities that you overcame and maybe some unique ways or how you addressed it, things that you learned along the way with addressing that adversity?
Yeah, well, you mentioned in the intro that I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, an autoimmune disease, after my first Olympic Games. I was 24 years old, and yeah, it just came out of nowhere. No family history. I didn't really know what it was when I was told that I had it, and I was also told by two doctors that it was the end of my swimming career. I had invested so much time, so much effort, so much into getting to that level in the sport, and yeah, and it was being pulled from me, and I think that the lessons learned in sport, you know, how to set goals and take small steps and to achieve those goals, gave me the fortitude necessary to not accept that, to get back into the sport, despite these doctors saying that it can't be done. Nobody had ever gone to the Olympic Games with type 1 diabetes previously, so they weren't wrong. I just had to prove them wrong.
Right. Now you come from a swimming legacy. Your grandfather, right, was he a swimmer?
Yeah.
And then of course your father.
Back. My father, my grandfather, my mother was a swimmer too. They met at a swim meet, at a swimming pool.
Oh, that's cool. I did not know that.
Yeah.
I recently saw that, you know, your dad, of course, has a swim text that he's coming out with. And I didn't know this either, but he roomed with Mark Spitz in Munich. Did he ever tell you about how surreal that whole, I mean, I think his events were prior to the tragedy at Munich. So I don't know if he was present during the whole melee. Did he ever talk about that at all with you, or?
Yeah, he did. He was there. He remembers it well. It was the Olympic Games themselves were a completely different experience. There was no security at all. In those games, my mother and father were dating. My mother and her family could come and go into the Olympic Village as they pleased. You could walk up to any athlete's door and knock on it. It was like a hotel. Um, and um, and so yeah, that all changed with that tragedy. But he was roommates with Spitz, because Spitz is a Jewish American. They were afraid that he might be a target, and so they whisked him from the room in the middle of the night. And yeah, everybody remembers that. Certainly, my father.
How did your dad support you when you had the diagnosis with diabetes? I know that your initial doctor was a little, more than a little skeptical, and then you, of course, sought out other medical advice, and you, at some point, I don't know on the chronology, connected with Mike Bottom, one of your very connected coaches that you guys shared, I guess, an approach. How did he approach it, to his son? I'm sure it was tough for him to see you kind of dealing with the adversity, but how did he support you? And maybe it'll give us a little bit of backdrop for fathers and sons, and how they deal with things together.
Yeah, well, I was an adult. It's different for a parent when a child is diagnosed. They take on a large part of the responsibility of dosing insulin with meals and giving shots and staying up through the night to check on their blood sugar levels to make sure that they're not dropping. So he was able to sidestep a lot of that burden and I think worry. Obviously, there was concern. Obviously, there was support, but I was old enough to take it on as my own responsibility, and so the way that any parent would react, it was concern and support.
You always seemed to me to be the type of athlete that was not living in the shadow of his father. You did it sort of your way. He had his approach to, and of course, I know that he was, trained by one of the swimming great coaches, Doc Councilman. How did you kind of find your own way and then get comfortable with your own training methods? I know there's some interesting stories, some anecdotes. I saw on Swim Swam how you took a break from the monotony of the black line and all those laps, because for you, I guess it was a burnout, and decided to tell us about that raft thing in the diving pool that day, and sort of the different approaches that you took to kind of keep it fresh and avoid burnout.
Yeah, so to compete at that level of the sport, it becomes so consuming. I was training between 6 and 8 hours every day, with the exception of Sunday. And just you do that day in, day out. Most swimmers don't take more than 2 weeks off through a year. And that usually, it includes all the weekends. So it's not like a regular work week for them. So it can, a lot of burnout, a lot of overload, overuse injuries can be sustained. And I just swam a lot of laps back and forth. The monotony of it gets to you. And so I always made a point of carving out time for myself, taking a year off after each Olympic Games. Not, I was staying active during that time, playing other sports or doing something else. And then from 2000 to 2008, I'd say 60% of my swimming was done in the ocean. I was living down in South Florida, and that made it so much more entertaining than the black line at the bottom of the pool. Swimming around with fish, chasing down fish, spearfishing and surfing. All explosive work, all very specific to the races that I was doing. So I felt like swimming against currents, going out and kicking against a strong current for 5 hours, is like a runner that only runs uphill, and then all of a sudden you get into still water and it feels like you're running downhill. That was it just change of environment, change of scenery. It allowed me to stay in the sport. I retired at age 34 from the sport, and if you told me at 15 years old that I'd still be swimming at 34, and that's was all I was doing, I would have never believed it. My father, I was able to stay. I was 34 when I retired. My father took a year off medical school to come back and make his third Olympic Games at age 25, and his nickname was the Old Man of the Sea. At 25, now that's like younger than I think the average age of the men's swim team at the Olympic Games. So the sport has changed. Obviously, there's more opportunity, sponsorship, interest that can help support the athletes and allow them to continue doing what they want to do, rather than prematurely have to go out and join the real world, get a job to pay for groceries. That's part of the sacrifice. Even now with the sponsorship opportunities, so many of those athletes that you see on the medal podium at the Olympic Games, spent a lot of time sleeping on couches and eating breakfast cereal, cheap pizza and stuff, just to get through, just to continue doing what they love to do. Obviously, a Michael Phelps or a Ryan Lochte are an exception, where they're making a lot of money, but for most of the athletes representing Team USA, there's real sacrifice.
As far as what you've come across since your journey, have you been able to technically advise any elite athletes that have come down with the diagnosis with diabetes, or any amateur athletes coming up the ranks? Has there been any specific things where you've been able to kind of, because you talked to me a couple times about how you have to monitor your sugar carefully because of the adrenaline of getting ready for the event and so forth, and maybe.
Yeah. So I have been able to work with quite a few athletes with diabetes. I've done a lot of grassroots advocacy work through the years, and have connected with so many incredible patient organizations, research groups, and hospitals, caregivers that specialize in the area of diabetes management. And so that has connected me with countless people, many of them athletes before they were diagnosed, many wanting to continue to be athletes after the diagnosis. So yeah, that's been rewarding. I mean, it really is nice for me to be able to do that, because there isn't that much information out there. For when I was diagnosed, there was no instruction manual. There was very, very, very little information available talking about the difference between aerobic exercise and anaerobic exercise, and the spikes that come with competition, the adrenaline, the stress, the endorphins that cause blood sugars levels to rise. It wasn't talked a lot about, and that has changed considerably. There are more resources available to somebody diagnosed today that wants to participate in sport, and I've lended a shoulder to that effort through the years, through various ways. I co-authored the International Olympic Committee consensus statement on youth sport, on how to manage chronic conditions in sport and physical activity, and that's published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. So, for a dumb jock, I found myself able to be in with some incredible sports medicine professionals, and the folks that are trying to make it easier for people with diabetes and with other chronic conditions to be part of sport. Unfortunately, for so many years, they were discriminated against, and if you have a volunteer baseball coach, at youth level. It's usually some player's dad, big heart, cares about the sport, played the sport to some degree, when they were young, but they don't have medical training, like how to treat hypoglycemic reaction on the field, that type of thing. So, when they hear, oh, Timmy has diabetes, very politely, they're put on the bench because they are seen as a liability. And so there weren't as many athletes in sport prior to this kind of effort. And I'm one of many. So many people have contributed to the dissemination of materials that can help volunteer coaches address these topics, and for athletes themselves to read up on how to address some of these very treacherous things, low blood sugars and high blood sugars, and then complications that can stem from unmanaged diabetes. It's a very real thing, and so a lot of people have struggled with that. Yeah, and we're just doing our best to make incremental improvements. Fortunately, there have been such advances in technology, insulins, faster acting insulins. There are continuous glucose monitoring devices that I wish I had while I was training that make a huge difference in an athlete's ability to head off and prevent hypoglycemic reactions from occurring. So yeah, we're making strides. It's getting easier, and there's more and more examples of people performing at the highest level of sport because of it with diabetes.
So I think you are one of the, as you said, there's been many athletes, but you're certainly one of the poster childs of breaking down the stigmata with diabetes because you achieved such a high level of success. What other sort of, we're in the age of, with healthcare, information and disinformation, what other things, if you were on a healthcare task force, and I know you've testified in Congress, what things would you like to see with not only diabetes, but chronic disease that are not being addressed, other than the fact that we're more open now to Timmy not sitting on the bench, to being inclusive? But what other areas do you think are still lagging, other than things that are more difficult, let's face it, to change, like financial costs of insulin, which, certainly there's been an awareness, but maybe other things that you're aware of because you live with diabetes?
Sure. Access to health insurance, pre-existing conditions. This is a topic in an election year. The rising costs of drugs for people with chronic conditions. It's exploiting the sick when you look at the profits that are made. So combating against that, combating some of the interests of industry. It's difficult at times, but we have to speak up. There has to be some unity among patients to address these things in order to be heard. And yeah, that's going to be an ongoing battle.
I know you've been always one to not always take the popular sort of approach with being vocal about things that you believed in. I know that was the case when there was scandals with Balco and athletes that you thought might have used performance-enhancing drugs. What sort of gave you that inner sort of message to do that, when a lot of athletes, for reasons either sponsorship or fear of repercussions with the Olympic Committee or their teammates, or being fearful of being one, to be, let's say, jealous, people can come up with contrive any sort of stories they want for somebody that speaks out against something that they think is a problem. What sort of drove you through that? And I guess, would you do it again if faced with the same knowledge that you know now? And I'm sure there was some blowback, but I mean, I'd be interested to know if you felt that speaking out was worth it.
There's definitely a price that you pay to do that. That, you know, to exercise that freedom of speech, there's a price to pay. And you know, my sponsors were eclectic, off-brand, Guinness beer instead of Procter and Gamble. You know, like Everlast instead of just Speedo, and the difference was, you know, a lot of money to go with kind of those more obscure brands that would be associated with somebody who was willing to talk openly about doping in sport and be honest about it. It was something that it troubled me. I am compelled. I have a strong sense of justice, social and otherwise, but it just seemed so unjust that you know, you could you know, somebody who steals $1,000 from a gas station goes to jail. Lance Armstrong steals millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, and he can say, "Oh yeah, but the next guy was cheating, and the next guy was cheating. Everybody was cheating." That's not true. That's not true. Like, you may have to go down many, many, many tiers, but eventually somebody down there was a clean athlete who could have been the best. We don't know his name. That's it. That's an injustice. And you know, just how self-righteous these people were too. I mean, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Sammy Sosa, Mark McGuire, Jose Canseco. Like, these were all childhood heroes of mine. I loved baseball when I was a kid. I was just like shattered to learn that not only were these guys cheaters, but they're just like the biggest assholes ever. And that just irked me to no end. And you know, I didn't see any consequence. Right? The consequence was, they, you know, if they were shamed, they didn't have to give up all their money or anything like that, and they weren't going to jail. So it just, I don't know. Yeah, that I was always kind of speaking up, and doping occurs in the Olympics too. I mean, the documentary Icarus kind of showed the systematic doping, the Russian athletes, and I saw it early in my swimming career. My first international meet was 1994 World Championships in Rome, and the Chinese women won almost every single event. I think they only like lost 2 events: the women's 200 freestyle and like maybe a relay. Otherwise, they were, I mean, winning like top 2, 3 medals in some of the events. It was just, and it was so clear that they were cheating. There was just, I mean, the technique, I mean, you're around the sport, you have such an intimate knowledge of the sport. You're able to see, you've been through the training, and you're able to see the incremental improvements and stuff. And they didn't have the technique. They didn't have the training background. It was all secretive. It was just, and so it just, that was my first international meet. And I think most of those women that won at that meet eventually tested positive somewhere down the years down the road. And their medals were, you know, never stripped or anything like that. Another personal thing that touched me was Michelle Smith, Irish swimmer in 1996 Olympics, and she beat Alison Wagner. And Alison was the sweetest girl, a friend, and she was the best in the world. And she got silver medals in 2 events, I think, to Michelle, and you know, nobody remembers that. And so I took it upon myself to write a letter to email Michelle Smith. She's a lawyer in Ireland, and I've probably written her about half a dozen times, just asking her to make it right. You know, she ended up being banned from the sport because she had tampered with a urine sample, and it had been pretty clear that she had been cheating when she was caught doing that. And so, you know, but it was, you know, that wrong was never made right. And you know, a lot of people just forget, move on. But Allison didn't. You know, I didn't.
Well, I'm glad you took it upon yourself to have a voice with this. I know that you know, I was never involved with any previous to being with an Olympic development track program. I was never involved with any high level Olympic stuff, but even still, I would have occasionally an Olympic caliber athlete come in. And I had a sprint cyclist, and she went to Trexlertown for the Velodrome finals, and she was beating this woman that I think was doping. And the way the woman who beat out the patient that I was working with, she came in with some Achilles issues. She kind of peaked everything at the right time with the doping cycle, and she had shoulders like a linebacker. And it seemed very interesting how in training she was doing very well, but then when it came to peaking at those event times, the tides changed. So that's one thing that struck me, and I could identify it. And I think when athletes who have been through the grind know how hard it is to get to where, even to, get to a national collegiate level and beyond that, knowing how much of a grind it is, I think it's important that people like yourself did step up. And so I commend you that you did do that. You took a chance, but it's who you are. And I think it was great and I hope that more people will continue with different things that come up, different social issues. And I think we're seeing a lot of that certainly now more than ever.
I mean, there's some
Go ahead.
would rather not talk about. Doping is one. Sexual abuse in sport that we saw with Larry Nassar and gymnastics that certainly was occurring a lot in the sport of swimming. People don't want to talk about that stuff, and it's ugly stuffed. And sponsors don't want to be aligned with somebody who is addressing that kind of stuff. So, but that's how that's how we fix it. We have to make it a national conversation. We have to address it. We have to look at the ugliness of it, and be open and honest. And it's only that way that we can stop it from happening.
Absolutely. Tell me, moving to kind of coaching and the next generation and youth, what are some of the ways that you get or that you would recommend? Because there's going to be people watching this on YouTube after that, let's say have a kid that's afraid to even dive into a pool, like that's such a leap of faith to go head first into a pool. You talked to let me just get this out of the way. Joy, can we get this screen thing out of the way? Tell me a little bit about ways that you've cued children and people that you've talked to about, I guess, transcending that fear.
Sure. Yeah. So I've had a lot of professional success in working in healthcare and have some accomplishment with the diabetes advocacy stuff. But
you had some cues, Gary, that you did. I saw a video that you did where you were telling some kids about cues that you used in preparation for your events to kind of almost take on a persona of I got this. So maybe to talk a little bit about some of those things that I think from a sports psychology standpoint that kind of got you ready for prepared for success.
Yeah, being able to work with kids from learn to swim level up to elite athletes, there's certainly rewards at either end of the spectrum. With a learn to swim kid, you see fear turn to confidence, and that's magic. I mean, there's nothing more rewarding than when you're able to see that happen. And when they are able to see, like, yeah, I can do this, I can, and that process that's involved. So I love doing that kind of work. And then, in terms of the elite athletes, little tricks that you learned, through many years of competing, things that worked for me, to be able to share that with others, also very rewarding, to see them fulfill their own dreams and meet their own goals. Some of those things, it really is, it differs from individual to individual. And that's whether, learn to swim. Some kids are just absolutely terrified of the water initially. Others are fearless, just go running straight for it with no ability to swim at all. And elite athletes, those, our character varies, where we grew up, whether it was in a communist country or in California, two very different settings, mindsets, mentality, approach, worldview. So, then there's, everybody, shy, extrovert, all the pillars of personality to take into consideration. And there is not a one-size-fits-all approach that works. So that was what was really neat, to be able to work with Mike Bottom. He was a brilliant psychologist, graduated the top of his class, and he applied that psychology to his athletes. What motivates us, what demotivates us, and it varied from individual to individual. Some people he needed to yell at, like 2 inches from their face, just scream at them in order to get the best result out of that person. If he tried that with me, it would have had the opposite effect. I just would not have performed as well. So he was somebody that shared with me that we really need to fine tune our approaches with individuals that we're working with, whether that's learn to swim or elite level athletes.
Well, I love the pre-race routine. I think we'll finish with this, Gary. Tell me how you have sort of managed with this unique time that we're living in right now with the pandemic, maintaining, positive psychology. Obviously, you're getting involved with coaching now. You're giving something back to the sport. I know you're involved with some other things as well. On a personal level and sort of a health and fitness level, what would sort of you share as an athlete to the community about ways to sort of overcome the blahs that many people have with, the environment of feeling more closed in?
Yeah, well, so much data verifying that, in addressing mental health, the mental health benefits to exercise. So if, I know that it's a struggle for so many people right now, that lives are being disrupted, interrupted, reinvented, that, so many people are having to pivot in such major ways right now. Everybody. And so it's important to maintain some exercise. It seems like there are two people that I meet through the crisis and reaching out to people and people that I'm coming across. Those that are saying, gosh, I'm sitting on the couch and I finished Netflix, or I finished HBO, or, eating too much, or just, taking up bad habits, maybe drinking too much or something like that. And then other people who I come across and they're like, I've never been in better shape. I can't remember the last time I was in great shape, and if you can make something part of your routine, every Wednesday at 2:00, or 5 p.m., I'm going for a 5-mile hike or 20 minutes on the treadmill, at lunch or something, whatever it is, some routine some physical activity and exercise will help you. It'll help all of us.
Gary, that was great. I really appreciate you doing this segment of my podcast, FitFoot U. You've been just great with the healthcare community and a personal friend as well. And I really appreciate that you took some time to do this. So thank you so much, and wishing you continued success with your diabetes advocacy and your coaching and with your family.
Thanks so much for having me on, Ben. It's really a pleasure, and keep up the good work you're doing.
Okay, thank you, Gary.
All right.
Bye.